Greetings everyone, and welcome to Back to Ashes. My name is Phoenix. I'd like to give a very special shout out to the reformed members of Back to Ashes. Disenchanted Tear, Through Scrutiny, Samantha Place, Lisa Radford, Tina Mead, Stephanie McLaren, Corpse Lover, Mana Ash, Normie DW, Christy Elias, Cindy Cleveland, and Patty's niece. To those of you who have donated to my GoFundMe, I appreciate you. If anyone would like to know what the GoFundMe is about, it can be found down below in the description. Also, if you would like to become a member of Back to Ashes, all of that information can be found below. If this is your first time here, or you would like to help out the channel, don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment, as it does help this channel grow. Now, with all of that being said, it is time to go back to ashes, for once we arise from the ashes, we are a bigger, brighter, stronger, and happier person in the morning. Sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack, or tuck in and get warm, and prepare for this dose of vocal melatonin entitled Scary Stories from Reddit. Right after this intro, an ad will play. I'll read the first story an ad will play, and after that there will be no more ads within this video. Disclaimer, some of these stories might contain material not suitable for all. Listening discretion is advised. First thing on Emily's list would be the beds. She effing hates the beds they have there. Hard and lumpy in some areas, soft and empty in others. And don't even get her started on the pillows. Next thing would be the smell. The stench of dirty skin cells and dried dribble, nauseously mixing with pine bleach and soiled sheets. She effing hates it. She doesn't really think about all the doctors and nurses that much, but she effing hates them too. Sometimes thinking about other people hurts her head. If she had to listen to them or talk to them or anything for them, it would send an itchy, crawly spider across her brain. So she would try and not think about the people so much. Apart from Laura. She thought Laura was kind of okay. If she was having a particularly bad day, all she had to do was tell Laura, and she would let Emily out for a cheeky cigarette. If you spend as much time there as Emily does, you would tend to figure out which nurses you can to trust. Go get some sun, said Laura. Go walk on the grass and get some fresh air. She quickly handed Emily the cigarette and lighter and leaned in closer to whisper, 5 minutes, okay? Emily took her offer, but the last thing Emily needed today was the outside world crashing down on her. She really couldn't handle anything extra in her head. You see, today was already a bad day for Emily. She barely got any sleep because her mattress was especially lumpy last night, and because she couldn't sleep. She was hyper aware of everything. The smell from the other patients seemed to linger within her nostril hairs. Constant chatter from down the hall seemed to vibrate in her ear canals, and to top it all off, the new medication they put her on made her brain itch even more. Medication. That's another thing on her list. She absolutely despises the meds they insist she take. Take this, you'll feel better. Swallow this, you'll feel better. But she would claim that not once had she felt better. Well, today, Emily has had enough. And she's thought of the perfect solution. A perfect way to end all of this. To end all the things she hates. The beds, the smells, the people, the meds. Everything. All it would take is a lighter. I'm a retired major crimes detective, and I've seen true evil 3 times in my career. All 3 were in the last decade of my career. I spent 12 years walking the beat before I had the opportunity to step in and assist a detective and a CSI on a double homicide. Through my numerous connections from years on the streets, we managed to get several leads that led to the arrests of the guilty. I moved out of patrol and spent a decade investigating sex crimes, arsons, and armed robberies. I took advanced training, seminars, and workshops, studying past cases and offender modalities. I worked with the drug squads on serious assaults and the occasional murder before finding myself stepping in for a retiring detective. I was familiar with his partner, Connolly, and we became a good team. I bring this all up to emphasize that I've seen horrific shit in my 33 years on the force. Images I'll never shake. People who still haunt my dreams. I can honestly say that most of the criminals I put away haven't been evil. They've all been motivated by something, however, benign, to commit their acts. Then there are some that are on the fence, the ones that take violent crimes further than would typically be the case. And then there are those that dream up horrific atrocities to be inflicted on the world around them, because why the hell not? Patty Wilson fell somewhere beyond the shades of your typical serial killer. She was the first person I encountered on the job who I could reliably say had true evil within her. Patty was an RN that had moved into an OBGYN and birthing clinic in one of the city's lower-class neighborhoods. This particular clinic had a terrible miscarriage and stillbirth rate, but the numbers were fudged and kept hidden. Eventually, people in the neighborhood started talking and word got out of how many deaths there had been. Our station was contacted, and normally that type of thing would land on another desk, but we were short-staffed, so Connolly and I were brought in. Our investigation led us to Patty, and we found that in her 23 years at the clinic, there'd been over 2,000 miscarriages. She'd been given a chemical cocktail to the expectant mothers, claiming it would help with sleep. Instead, it gradually killed the fetus as it grew. We'd also discovered that after several dozen healthy births, Patty would take the baby away to be cleaned up, but would return with the horrible news that the baby had died shortly after being delivered. Our investigations into that didn't lead anywhere concrete, but one of the threads we were pulling on led us to believe Patty had been lying to the mothers, telling them that their baby had died, when in fact the baby was healthy, but was shipped off to the highest bidder. A live baby on the black market could fetch a tidy sum, whether for organ harvesting, stem cells, or something more deviant and horrific. We believed it was racially motivated, as almost all the miscarriages and stillbirths occurred exclusively with black parents, but Patty denied it all. I remember watching Patty in our first interview with her. Her face was normal and moved expressively as she spoke and answered our questions. But her eyes didn't. They were empty, black holes, and the longer you stared into them, the more uncomfortable you became. Even after the trial, which had her served with multiple life sentences, Patty denied any wrongdoing. The next case where I witnessed true evil, it fractured into an investigation involving multiple events. Connolly and I were called in to investigate an attack on a beach volleyball tournament. On the city's largest beach, there was a national tournament with over 300 teams playing on 50 courts over the course of the weekend. The ages were from 12 to 65 and were both men and women. During morning warm-ups before the first game of the first day, one scream turned into 2 screams, turned into 100 screams. Over 1/3 of the players needed immediate medical attention. Their feet, ankles, knees, thighs, hips, stomach, and in some cases up to their shoulders and face, were covered in deep, gushing cuts. Someone had gone to the beach the night before the tournament and brought hundreds of small, flat pieces of wood with razor blades sticking up from the centers in an upward-down capital T shape. The wood was dug into the sand, with the blade's sharp end pointed upward and hidden just under the surface so no one could see them. It must have taken hours to set up. There were no deaths, but the damage that was caused resulted in hundreds of injuries and several dozen athletic young adults with sliced Achilles tendons and a dwindling future in sports. As with every investigation, we started off at the crime scene and worked our way outwards in tight, concentric circles. While the CSIs were combing the beach, Connolly and I were interviewing the people who ran the tournament, looking for any enemies or people who might want to target them in this tournament in particular. But those led nowhere. Sadly, the CSIs fared no better. The entire crime scene was awash. There were so many footprints and shoe and sandal prints in the sand. It was impossible to search for tracks, and the actual razor blades and pieces of wood had been doused in bleach before being placed in their small dugouts. There were no security cameras on the beach, and the lone one that was in the parking lot didn't capture any cars between the hours of midnight and 7 a.m. Our phones were ringing off the hook with tips, but there were no real leads. After a month, we were nowhere in the investigation. Then a new investigation came in, and our hamstrung department got even tighter. Connolly and I took it on as well. At a senior's home along the city's waterfront, a fire had started in the basement. Because of the accelerants used, it quickly overtook the first 2 floors. From there, the rest of the 8-story building went up. 22 residents and 9 staff died in the fire, all from smoke inhalation. We scoured the undamaged security footage, but again found no suspects around the parking lots or front entrances. The footage from the rear of the building was destroyed, so we couldn't check it. Then a third investigation dropped onto our desks. This time, there was a mass poisoning in a junior high school cafeteria. There were 23 deaths, 15 of which were students, and over 100 severe injuries. Our investigation showed that someone had stealthily broken into the school overnight and poisoned every piece of food in the cafeteria, stockroom, fridge, and freezer with arsenic. It was a miracle more people didn't die. All the school's exterior cameras were working, and after scouring them for clues, we finally found one at the back doors. The footage captured someone dressed in all black with a hood and ski mask over his face. He'd used a small set of lock-picking tools to enter the back door, which led to the kitchen. He used the same door to exit and ran off across the soccer field towards the water. And everything made sense. The beach volleyball courts, the seniors' home, and now this junior high. They're all backed out onto the water. The school itself had taken advantage of the fact by introducing students to rowing, kayaking, sailing, swimming, and other sports and activities on the open sea. And the seniors' home was partially marketed based on its incredible view of the water. We hypothesized that 3 mass crimes were committed by the same individual. We marked all 3 locations on the map and skinned down the coast for all of the marinas and harbors. Then we went back through all of the routes and picked out various waterfront hotspots we knew would have footage of their exteriors. Using the dates of the 3 incidents, we cross-checked the footage to try and find any repeat boats on the nights in question. We watched a shit ton of footage. There was only one boat that stood out. A large, older black speedboat being driven by a lone individual we couldn't make out details of. A red light glowed from inside the cabin. Connolly and I got pictures of the boat printed and went back to check the marinas and harbors. None of the docks we went to had seen the particular boat or had records of it, which made us think it was docking at a private residence. I spoke to one of my friends in narcotics named Wako, and he brought up the drug boats that'd been populating the cove near the last dock we visited. It turned out that the many drug users in our city had been moving away from alleyways and SROs and onto small dingies and drug boats, turning them into floating pill houses. The boats were harder for cops to break up or investigate, and you could float in the cove or out in the nearby channel for up to 6 months before having to vacate. Of course, the 6-month rule was never enforced, so the cove kept getting busier with more and more drug boats. Waco offered to help. He went in one night and made his way around the 30 or so boats, which were loosely tied together. Waco found our black boat. He learned the owner was a guy people called Red. He was a dealer and let people use and pass out on board his boat afterwards. The next night, Waco went back and we followed from a distance with the Coast Guard. We had Waco wired so he would hear everything on board. His plan was to get on with a few others to buy and use some heroin, then pass out. He would fake the shooting up part and pretend to fall asleep. Connolly and I listened in, hearing the details of the casual conversations going on from the other users as they bought and started prep. Soon enough, all the voices went quiet, including Waco's. A rough, agitated voice called out, asking if anyone was awake. There was no response. The voice belonging to Red laughed and said, "Ha ha ha, good." We heard some shuffling, then the engine on the boat rev into gear. The boat peeled out, leaving the cove behind. Waco had a GPS tracker in his shoe, so Conley and I watched the boat on the monitor as he headed out to sea. We followed from a distance. The Coast Guard's lights all turned off and went completely stealth. Connolly and I continued listening in. After several minutes, the engine died down. There were sounds of chains rustling, then clanking together. Waco's voice came over the mic in a hushed and frantic whisper. "He's chaining us together. There's an anvil on one end." Our captain flipped the lights and sirens on, and the boat gunned it towards the blip on our radar. Over the mic, we heard Red notice the sirens. He started to panic and, from what Waco told us, was about to toss the anvil over the side. But Waco was up and ready to fight. He surprised Red from behind and got him in a chokehold. When we arrived, Red was unconscious on the floor of the boat, and Waco was sitting on his back. There were 5 users laying on the floor. They were all dead. Red had given them all spiked batches, and they died minutes before. When we got back to land, interrogating Red was useless and terrifying. Useless because he said nothing, and terrifying because of how he said nothing. He'd bitten off his tongue moments before we got him in the room. He was in a hospital for the next day and a half before we set him down with a pencil and paper. We didn't really need Red to talk, though. There was more than enough evidence to put him away for the deaths of the 5 users on the boat. And then, divers found more bodies along the same stretch Red boated on. Altogether, it appeared Red was responsible for the deaths of over 50 people, and that didn't include the beach volleyball tournament, the seniors' home, or the junior high school. The thing I remembered most about my brief time sitting across from Red during the interviews were his eyes, just like Patty. I watched his face move and twitch and wrinkle, but his eyes were always the same empty black, holding my gaze. We never got a reason or motive for any of it. We found out he'd been in and out of foster homes up until his 16th birthday. Coincidentally enough, there was a house fire which killed both his foster parents and 2 other kids living there. After that, Red disappeared for a few years, then got nabbed for an assault in a movie theater and spent his 20s in and out of prison. Who knew how much destruction Red had caused over the course of his life? My third experience with true evil was just as Connolly was nearing his retirement. Poetically enough, it was our last case together. We'd been investigating the individual abductions of 6 Caucasian women between the ages of 18 and 22. It was a little old for grooming gangs, and we ruled out human trafficking. We'd done a ton of legwork and repeat interviews with friends and family. No one went back on previous statements. Everyone was solid. We didn't have a single person of interest. We did have one connection between the girls. They all traveled in similar underground heavy metal and punk rock circles. They all appeared to have a similar fascination with Satanism. Connolly and I went back over the details of each disappearance and found they all coincided with a certain opening band that occasionally played at a weekly death metal show. They were called Helvet and were a Norwegian black metal band. They were known for covering themselves in what looked like blood and performing in masks. Each mask was different, but followed the typical design of a face with eyes, nose, and a mouth. But the texture looked like dried skin. Dark wicker twigs stuck out of the back of the head, resembling a porcupine. The more we read of them, the more they became our suspects. Connolly and I got an address and decided to go introduce ourselves. The place was on the outskirts of town, surrounded by a large plot of land and forest. We parked up the driveway, and I'll admit, the walk up to the house, I was feeling very nervous. It was dusk, and the sky was a darkening gradient of orange to dark blue. The residence itself was a large, old farmhouse. Death metal blared from somewhere inside, thudding out through the shuttered windows. There was a large black van parked out back and 2 sedans in the front. A scream erupted from the house, louder than the death metal rock. I pulled my 9mm and Conley pulled his .38. We called for backup and went in through the front door, which was unlocked. The interior had a staircase to the right that led upstairs, and a hallway to the left that led to a living room, dining room, and kitchen. More screams erupted along with the pounding music. We could tell the screams were coming from below us, and found a door leading to a staircase to the basement. The screams and music got louder and were joined by chanting. Conley led, trigger-fingered, creeping his way down the stairs. As he got to the bottom, Conley swung out to clear the room, but someone was there. A tall mountain of a man in a dark mechanic suit, wearing one of the group's eerie masks, swung down at Connolly. Connolly saw it coming, firing his .38 into the guy. My right ear blew out, and my left was filled with ringing, chanting, and screaming. As I got my head back on, I saw that the man had swung down at Connolly with a hatchet, and it lodged into Connolly's neck. He fell back but continued firing into the far end of the basement. I let my 9mm lead me around the corner. There were old bed sheets hanging from the ceiling, obscuring my vision of the basement. The heavy metal kept pumping and the chanting grew, but the screaming had stopped. I wanted to check Conley, but I needed to clear that room. I stepped over the body Conley had shot and followed the chanting. It led me through the sheets and into a large opening. Dozens of red candles were lit. There was a circle drawn on the floor, and inside it was an inverted pentagram painted in what looked like blood. In the far corner, the ground was dirt, and I could see several graves protruding from the earth. At the center of the pentagram, a young woman wearing barely rags was chained to pegs in the ground and had just given birth. On each point of the pentagram around her were what appeared to be remains of 5 recently delivered and now dead babies. Kneeling in front of the exhausted and crying woman was another band member, dressed similar to the previous Hulk, but smaller and with a slightly different mask. He held the newest, just delivered baby in his hands as it cried. There were 2 other figures in the room, one over each of the kneeling guy's shoulders. The one to the right was holding a large, traditional 2-handed sledgehammer. The handle was thick wood and the mallet was solid iron, lined with carvings and covered in blood and innards. The guy on the left was holding an open book and had been guiding the others in the chanting. We all stared at each other in some strange, horrific standoff. The guy with the sledgehammer pulled first, lifting it to swing at me. I leveled up on him and walked 2 rounds into his chest before turning to the other 2. The guy with the book threw it at me and lunged. I managed to get 2 more rounds off into him, but his momentum carried him through me, and we hit the floor heavily. My head cracked the ground hard, and I saw the familiar stars rushing the edges of my vision. Everything sounded like it was underwater, but was moving really fast. I managed to turn my head and saw the one remaining band member, the one holding the baby. He'd placed it on the ground at the center of the pentagram. He grabbed the sledgehammer from his dead friend and lifted it to slam down on the remaining baby. I didn't even realize it, but I still had my 9mm in my hand. Reflexively, I pulled the trigger repeatedly until it clicked empty. The final shot connected with the guy's head as he was about to swing down. He toppled back and the sledgehammer fell safely to the side. I don't remember much else after that. I woke up in the hospital and was informed Conley had died, as had all the band members. The baby and the young woman had survived though, so there was that. The investigation was taken over by 2 other detectives and revealed that the band had been taking women from shows, bringing them back to the farmhouse and trying to impregnate them. Once they had gotten 6 pregnant, they planned a mass ritual sacrifice to be conducted after the final birth as an offering to the devil in some Faustian bargain. The other women had been killed after their deliveries and were buried in the far end of the basement. I never saw any of the band members' eyes when they were alive because of the masks, though I'm sure if I did, they'd carry the same darkness as Patty's and Red's. I said I'd seen true evil 3 times in my career, and that's true. But that last time, there was more to what happened than what I put into my reports. It's the reason I retired immediately after that case. It's the thing that made me realize there was an evil I couldn't even begin to comprehend. I'd seen it right when I got into the basement and leveled off my 9mm at the 3 men. There was something else down there with us. It was floating in the middle of the circle, kind of like black smoke, but it stayed in place, wafting together before separating and reconnecting. Bolts of red electricity shot through it. The smoke got larger as the chanting grew. It pulsed and expanded and reached out, forming into the shape of a body. What gives me nightmares now is thinking about if that last baby had been killed and the smoke finished solidifying. I'm terrified that whatever it would have manifested into would have shown me another realm of evil. As I checked out, I wiped the condensation off the bottle of champagne. I did it. I made partner. Years of sacrifice finally paid off. Yet, as I drove home, I could only think about my wife. A distance had grown between us. Years of late nights at the office didn't help. The champagne was a peace offering. I would finally be around more. We could fix our marriage. I still loved her. When I got home, there was a police car in my driveway, yellow crime scene tape across my front door. "Mr. Hartman?" The officer instructed me to sit on the front of his hood. What's going on?" "I'm Officer Bradley. Tonight there was a break-in in your house. We're still figuring out the details, but your wife has been killed." "No, I just saw her this morning." He handed me his business card. "This is a grief counselor. We recommend you contact them. Mr. Hartman, I have to ask, did your wife have any enemies?" Enemies? Nothing appears to be taken from the house. Could she have been having an affair?" I barely can babble answers to him. Enemies? Affairs? Did I really let her slip away so far? Officer Bradley instructs me to grab any essentials in the house and stay in a hotel tonight in case the killer returns. In the house, seeing all of her stuff, I start crying. She was just here. Her phone's oddly laying on the ground. Did she try to call the police? I entered her password and check. There are 2 recent messages from an unknown number. One is an address. The second says, "Stupid bitch, pay up or die." My sorrow turns to rage. I decide I'm not going to show this to Officer Bradley. I go to Walmart, the only place open, and buy an aluminum bat and a length of rope. Whoever this killer is, he won't expect me. I'll have the element of surprise, knock him out, tie him up, and get him to confess. Kill him when I'm done. The address is a condemned warehouse. Perfect place to commit a crime. I slip through a hole that's been cut into the fence and find a door. What do you know? It's open. Inside, it's dark. I should have brought a flashlight. The lights surged on, blinding me. Electricity courses through my veins. I'm on the ground and feel the cold metal of handcuffs locking my wrists together. I told you he would fall for it. For being so rich, he's a moron. I look up to see my wife and Officer Bradley. Bradley is tying the rope I bought around my neck. He brought a rope. This is perfect. We'll hang him here and plant the body at your house. Overworked husband commits suicide. It's easy. After I get all his money, we'll get married. But I was going to fix things. I love my wife. The rope gets tight, crushing my larynx. My wife and I are very different people. Her delicate, careful nature has always opposed my reckless and adrenaline junkie lifestyle. She's tamed me down quite a bit, but people still comment that we are the definition of opposites attract. When my wife announced the pregnancy, our families placed bets on who he would take after. My wife and I prayed that he might just adopt both of our traits, because admittedly, our strong personalities had their flaws. She was a perfectionist to a fault, and I was a troublemaker at heart. When I held Hayden in my arms for the first time, I felt full in a piece of my heart I didn't even know existed. I've not always been the nurturing type, but Hayden made me want to be. It didn't take long for Hayden to grow into his personality. He was carefree, adventurous, boisterous, and snarky. It was clear who he took after. Everyone called him my mini-me. My wife rolled her eyes every time that comment was made. I could tell she was insanely jealous, and it was like she was angry with me for it. By the time Hayden was 8, he had developed a scary number of my traits, and I do mean it was scary. His mannerisms, his interests, his way of thinking, his argumentative style. It was like he was a reincarnation of me, much to my wife's disdain. The truly scary part was the speed at which Hayden adopted my traits. He was already mimicking my troublemaking behaviors, sneaking out, talking back, playing recklessly, even being a bit of a bully to his friends. Even I didn't start acting out like this so early on. It got worse. I watched him shoot a squirrel with a BB gun, then strangle it until it stopped moving. Weeks later, we found our cat Baxter barely moving, covered in blood, in Hayden's room. Last month, we went on a father-son fishing trip. He put a fish hook into my shoe. It pierced right through my heel, and he insisted it was a prank. He wouldn't be like this if he wasn't so much like you, my wife screamed at me. She was right. A lot more than she knew. But still, I didn't think it happened so soon. I didn't start strangling animals until I was 16. I knew what came next after the animals and pranks stopped satisfying the urge. I knew what he truly craved, because it's what I crave. With age, I've learned how to manage my urges, but Hayden was only 8. Impulse control was non-existent for him. Only time would tell what he would turn into. There was no fixing it. I looked into Hayden's eyes, tucking him into bed. I prayed that I'd see something in them, but all I saw was darkness. He only squirmed a little as I held the pillow over his face. I just wish he could have been more like his mother. It became apparent that we were only permitted to live on the coast and rivers. We have some settlements in the center of the mainland, and they are built on lakes and rivers. No one is foolish enough to step into their land. The land that was once our home, but now is a distant remnant of a time when we stood at the precipice. The apex predators now reduced to fishermen, but not by choice, only because they permitted it. Our enemy was at our feet. They climbed our walls and inhabited the plants and dirt around us. We swatted them away when they flew too close to our food. We exterminated them when they grew to be too many in places we didn't permit. They were nothing but disgusting bugs. They had nothing and were nothing, but now they've taken everything. The first country they took over was China. A large team of Chinese entomologists worked with CRISPR to genetically alter insects to be the perfect protein source. They altered their genetic makeup to be similar to shrimp and lobster. It would be far easier to get the world on board with insects as a food source, if the transition of taste was not an issue. Of course, there are people who don't like seafood, and this was a great step forward for a sustainable source of high-quality protein. But, like most things, there were unforeseen side effects of altering their genetic material. It started well with cockroaches. Each one was the perfect nugget of meat. People took to them quite early after the viral video challenge called Lobster Tail Challenge, which was just a lobster tail made from roach meat. For a while, it worked. Then they moved on to other insects. They chose anything with a large thorax that could be easily extracted from their carcass. Bugs like beetles and larger ants. The ants were the mistake. We made them larger so we could cultivate more meat from them. For a while, it seemed to be perfect, until they turned on us. They escaped their farm enclosure and raided nearby towns and cities. The army came in and napalmed their whole colony, but it didn't last for long. You never got rid of the entire invading army. It would only be a few weeks before they had enough to attack us again. Why weeks? Because we shortened their gestation period for reproduction. That's capitalism for you. Now, here we are. An army of our own design. They started to wear the corpses of the beetles for protection and farm the cockroaches themselves for subsistence. It doesn't matter how we try to fight back. They would never completely die out, and they'd always return. And now, 1,000,000 ants lay in wait for one delicious piece of human to cross the boundary. How do we know where the boundary is? Simple. It's made of human bones. Miss Elliot looked curiously at the boy seated at the table in adult history, a large volume open before him. His tablet was next to the book, his fingers busy on the screen. Every few minutes he would pause and turn a page of the book. He would come in every day after school and stay there until closing time. Children weren't supposed to stay there unattended, but the library had evolved into an after-school care for tweens. And the library knew until a child went missing, there wasn't much they could do about it. This boy never went to the children's section, just sat at this table, turning pages and playing on his device, brushing his fair, almost white hair out of his eyes. Eventually, she went up to him, breaking her strict librarian code to never disturb anybody reading. "That's an impressive book you've got there. History of the Russian Empire," she remarked. The boy looked at her. "Mommy will pick me up at 5, he said. "I'm okay." Miss Elliot sat down next to him. "Do you enjoy learning about the Russian Empire, or for a school project?" The boy turned to the empty chair on the other side, mumbling. Then he went back to his device. He swiped out of his running game and started typing. "I'm turning pages for the ghost. He loves reading, but he can't turn pages himself because he's a ghost." Miss Elliot tried to absorb the information. Then she looked at the empty chair, noticing how the book was angled towards it. She concentrated, staying still. As she focused, the air shimmered and thickened, assuming a human form seated on the chair. A human form avidly reading. Then she typed, "Do you like turning pages for the ghost?" The boy shrugged. "He comes to my dreams if I don't. When we were away, I had nightmares every night." The thick air reading swirled and rustled, and the boy hastily turned the page. Miss Elliot typed, "How can I help you?" The boy shrugged again, brushing his hair. A text from Mom popped up. He turned to the empty chair. "Mom's here early," he said. "I've got to go, but this nice lady can see you. She'll turn the pages for you." He snatched his tablet and, without looking at Miss Elliot, rushed away. Miss Elliot hesitated. The air rustled and an impatient growling hum rose. Hastily, she turned the page. The humming died down. That night, she had the most terrible nightmares about the library full of dead and dying people. The library was almost empty in the morning. Almost, but not quite. The Russian Empire book was out on the table, exactly where they had left it. Miss Elliot knew the reader was waiting for her. The memories of the nightmares fresh, she obediently sat where the fair-haired boy had sat and turned the page. The air rustled with content. The boy never returned to the library again. The night is cold. I swear the stars could be snowflakes suspended in the solid air if it weren't for the occasional twinkle. As the fire dwindled, it seemed like the moon was giving off more light than the dying embers. "Time for more wood," I said to myself. The only conversation I'd have all night. I need to use the wood sparingly, but rule number 1 was, do not let the fire go out. Every minute that goes by without an incident makes it easier to sleep, but I'm not sure if that's a good thing. I feel like I've lived this night 1,000 times, but I swear I haven't been away for that long. I guess that's what happens when everything is covered in a blanket of snow. It all looks the same. The grooves and rocks that form the earth that's covered up. In the morning, I'll need to find more kindling. Rule number 2 was, only forage during the day. But right now, it seems like morning will never come. This freeze seems to make time slow down. Waking back up every few minutes makes it hard to keep my mind from racing. They'll find me eventually, right? At some point, they will come back. I haven't moved. I've kept the fire going, and in the morning I'll make a plan to signal and shout. They said it can't come out in the light. It's cold. The wind has picked up, and snow is starting to get into my bag. Ignore it. Something cracked out in the woods. It's back. Whatever is watching me, waiting for me. The light seems to keep it at bay. Time for more wood, but rule number 3 rings in my head. When it arrives, don't move. Don't test its hunger. But the fire, what am I supposed to do? I can hear it, breathing, the air pushing out of its snarled snout. I can see its claws digging into the ground, as if it's getting on its mark. It can see the fire is dying, and it can feel my heartbeat straight to race. What was rule number 4? If the fire goes out... Shit, what was the rule? I watch as the cold wind snuffs out the remaining fire with one last gust. I crawl towards the fire helplessly, trying to blow on the coals to get any flame. The sound, its gait, the silence between each of its long limbs hitting the snow is just as deafening as its antlers breaking the occasional low-hanging limb. I can't seem to conjure another breath. The fear has suffocated me. I feel it behind me. The drool drip onto my back as it pounces. The night is cold. My dad disappeared for 2 weeks and came back. I don't think he's my dad anymore. I felt great pain as my legs hit the ground. Even with all that pain, I still carried myself up and tried to run as hard as I could. I began to run with a limp as I heard the demon let out an ear-piercing screech. I knew my life was over. I knew that he'd jump out the window and land straight onto me. But surprisingly, I heard him running out of my room. So, he's afraid of heights then, I said to myself. I still knew that he wanted me dead and that he'd eventually run out to our front door and kill me. I kept on running until I reached the house next street. I banged on the door as hard as I possibly could until an old man answered. "What are you doing at such a late time, Move! Hey, what's gotten into you, Davy? Mr. Matthews, please just close the door, I'll explain." "I'm not Close the door!" He eventually complied. "You're probably thinking I'm crazy, but my parents were arguing and I'm gonna call CPS if you don't let my son out of there, Mr. Matthews, please don't let... What's going on, Abraham? Oh, Lord, I thought he wasn't married. It's gonna be a bloodbath in here." I decided to go back to running. I ran out of the house via the back door as I heard Mr. Matthews let the demon in the house. I felt like a horrible person as I heard Mr. Matthews and his wife get torn to shreds by that devil. As I ran, I felt as if I was a murderer. I technically caused their deaths, after all. Going into their house is an action that still haunts me to this very day. I'm ashamed to say it, but the death of the Matthews bought me some time, as the demon was eating them. I managed to get a bit far away from the house. I eventually found a man and his family driving back home. I stopped the man and explained the situation. He surprisingly believed me. The man went to his house, which luckily was a bit far from where the demon was. He dropped off his family, then drove me to the airport where he parked his car and got me on a flight to Kansas. He knew I couldn't survive alone, so he decided to come with me. He got me an apartment and a certain amount of money each month to spend on food. He came to visit every once in a while until he and his family eventually moved to Manhattan and adopted me. I finally had people whom I can call parents again. I finally had a family once more. My life went on normally. I graduated college, got a job, moved out, and got married. I had children of my own and would occasionally visit my family every now and then. My adoptive father died back in 2012. Then my mother followed in 2014. I still mourn their loss to this day, but I didn't write all this to keep people up at night. 3 days ago, I got a call from one of my siblings about a man who broke into their home. I asked if I should come over, but he assured me that they'd be fine, and that he had already called 911 and the police were on their way. On top of that, him and his son were both armed. His phone was about to die, so I told him to stay safe before hanging up. I was worried sick that night. I barely put myself to sleep. I woke up the next morning to my son calling me. I went to see what he wanted when, much to my dismay, my worst nightmare had come true. "Dad! Uncle Sam is dead. He's dead!" I almost dropped dead on the floor as he said that. "What do you mean, dead?" I ran over to him, and I saw the TV on and the news reporter talking about a deadly burglar that ended the lives of a family of 5. I turned the TV off as I broke down crying. My brother and his entire family were wiped in the blink of an eye. Not going to his house that night might be the biggest mistake of my life. I eventually stopped crying as my family comforted me. I went on with my day and contacted a funeral service to arrange my brother's funeral. The next morning, I went to the morgue to see his body. It was mutilated. His eyes were popped, his hands were cut off, and a massive smile was carved onto his face. I feared that my father, or the demon that possessed him, might still be alive. What if it found me? I was prepared to move out right after the funeral, which was supposed to happen on Saturday, the 16th of this month. Worried sick, I was forced to go on with my day. Eventually night came and I went to bed. I woke up to my daughter's voice today morning. "Dad, someone is at our front porch. He says he wants to see you." I got out of bed and went to our front door. My fears were confirmed as I looked through our Ring camera. I saw my father. He still looked the exact same as he did 45 years ago. I told my daughter to barricade the door and hide in the master bedroom. I woke my family up and told them to hide. I already called 911 and can hear him breaking down our front door as I'm writing this. "How could you do this, Ethan? How? I loved you, Ethan. I gave you all I had. And in the end, you did Shut up. I want a divorce." My dad stormed out of the house. I still remember that night vividly. I was 13. I was playing on my Atari as my parents started to argue. My father cheated. My mother was obviously angered. She wanted a divorce, but my dad stormed out of the house the moment she said that. A relaxing but dreadful silence filled the house. What will happen now? Will I never see my dad again? The silence was broken by my mother's soft cries. I tried to comfort her, but she just yelled at me to go back to my room. I went back to my room, sobbing quietly. I felt as if those memories that I had with my parents were being torched right in front of me. One question repeated itself inside my head over and over again. Will I ever see my father again? I eventually stopped crying and went to bed. I woke up in the morning. It was a Sunday, so I didn't have to go to school. I put my favorite game in the Atari and started playing it. A few hours passed until I heard my mom's voice. "Breakfast is ready." I slowly got up and went to the living room. I sat on my chair as my mom placed food on the table. Instead of the regular family conversation, all I heard was dreadful silence. Without a word between me and my mother, we ate and went back to our rooms. My life went on this way until 12 days after my dad's disappearance. I was eating breakfast when I heard a knock on the door. Knock, 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 knock. I went to answer the door, and it was our neighbor, Clara. "Oh, hi. Are any of your parents here by chance?" "Yeah, there's my mom, but she's upset." "Oh, can I talk to you? after all you've done, you still have the nerve to show up on my door. He didn't get off my front porch, Clara. Get lost. I went back to eating breakfast as thoughts filled my head. Why did Clara knock on our door? Is Dad in danger? Isn't Dad at her house? I eventually finished my food and went back to my room. I played my Atari for a few hours until my mom knocked on my door. Hey, sweetie, I'm sorry for being like that for the past few days. It's just, I couldn't believe your father could do this to me after all those years. It's fine, Mom. I know how you feel. Oh, I'm glad you do. Hey, do you want to go to the cinema? Are you kidding me? Yes. My friends told me about a film called Star Wars. I really want to see it. Come on then. Get ready and come to the car. We went to the cinema, watched a film called Star Wars, and went back home. As my mother parked her car and we approached the door, we heard a woman repeatedly screaming, "Help me! Somebody please help me!" It sounded like it was coming from inside the house. The nearest police station was 1 hour away. My mom got a revolver she had in her car and kicked in the door to the house. I went in behind her, and what I saw still shocks me to this day. I saw my father, or what I thought was him, eating a human corpse while repeatedly screaming, "Help!" Without any hesitation, my mother shot him repeatedly, but the gunshots did nothing. Instead of falling dead, or at least getting injured, he got up and launched himself at her. I couldn't think properly, so I decided to run to my room and lock myself in. As I ran up the stairs, I heard my mom screaming and crying as the demon ripped her apart. I got into my room and locked the door behind me. I started crying as I just realized what had happened. My mother was killed by my father, or whatever demon he had in him. Amidst all this chaos, I remembered I had a telephone in my room. I held back my tears and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? Hello? My dad, he got possessed by a demon and killed my mom. I need you to stay calm, okay? Can you please tell us your address? Hey, buddy. I froze in terror. The telephone fell out of my hand. Hello? Kid, are you still there? No, you're not my dad. Do you want to go to the park? Come on, buddy, let's go to the park. 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 He started to kick the door in while repeating that sentence over and over again. His voice got louder with each kick. I felt like I was in a nightmare. I had a window in my room, but my room was on the second floor of our house. I had two choices: jump out the window or die. As the demon's voice got louder and his kicks got more powerful, I decided to jump. I opened my window, stood on the sill, and closed my eyes. I felt my feet sliding off the windowsill as the door to my bedroom burst open. To be continued. The afterlife isn't what you think it is. I overdosed. I don't really know what happened between that and me waking up, though. One moment I'm popping Tylenol like it's candy, and the next thing I know, I wake up in a black abyss. I get up and look around me. Nothing but a void all around me. I walk around for a few minutes before finding a desk. A desk with a person sitting there. A relatively tall being with a dark hood sits at a desk with a computer as the only thing on top. The man looks up at me. Took you long enough? Do you know how late you are? I don't have that much time. As of a minute ago, 40.7 million people have died this year alone. I go through thousands of people an hour. I now have a line of people to get to after you," the man said, getting up and approaching me. I stepped back, trying to wrap my mind around what he just said. "I'm messing with you. I'm omnipresent. I'm talking to you and everybody else at the same time." I just nod my head, not really sure what to say. "Let me tell you how things work around here. You see, you're in purgatory right now. You haven't died yet, so I have to decide what happens to you. To be honest, your body is in very bad condition though," he explains, as he wraps his arm around my shoulder and walks me down into the darkness of the abyss. A few seconds pass and the moments of my life start appearing like TV screens turning on. "So, you judge whether or not I go to hell or heaven?" I ask, wondering what waits for me later. "You're funny. There is no heaven or hell. What I do is I go through your entire life with you and show you every mistake you've ever made and what wrongs you've done to people. Then I decide what happens to you," he responds as his face takes on a more neutral expression. It's almost like he's not liking what he sees as my life literally flashes before my eyes. "I assume I'm a different case since I'm not really dead yet? Is this where you show me how my actions have affected others and then you send me back and I turn my life around for the better?" I ask. "This isn't a movie, kid. This is reality. You either get sent into your own personal void where you will forever be haunted by your mistakes, or you get reincarnated. Based on what I've seen from your short life, it's not looking so good," he says with a deeper tone. "Well, I suppose I should turn to the real world and get my life together then," I say, heading towards a screen showing my body. Something was wrong though. It seems like I flatlined while here. "Oh, you're not going anywhere," I hear, feeling a hand on my back. As soon as Hans was alone, he killed his baby half-brother Klaus, sliced him up, fried the slices in lard and ate him. It wasn't that Hans was necessarily an evil boy. It's just that he had been so hungry for so long. All through that long, hard winter. Most of the family's precious nutrition had gone to pregnant stepmother, naturally. And then Klaus had arrived, and stepmother still got most of the food because she was feeding Klaus. Hans had to work so hard with very little food, and he was just starving. His sister came in just as Hans was finishing up. He felt a bit guilty. He should have left some meat for her. She was starving too, and because she was a girl, she ate even less than Hans. Rita took one look at Hans with his skinny legs stretched out before him and his extended, distorted belly and the silly look of satisfaction on his face as he gazed at the pile of crunched-up baby bones before him, and knew what he had done. She cried out. She had been fond of Klaus, but there was no use making a fuss. "We have to run. They'll be back soon. She'll get the villagers to kill you." Hans burped, but then got up and followed Rita. He always did. He took a handful of bone splinters with him to mark the way. They ran into the woods, further and deeper than they'd ever had been. It was getting dark. Hans had long run out of splinters. Hans was starting to get hungry again. There isn't a lot of meat on a tiny baby. In the patchy leafy twilight, he saw a cottage made of gingerbread and decorated with sweets. "Look, Rita," he cried out with delight. Without waiting for a reply, he ran forward and began tearing out chunks of gingerbread from the walls and stuffing it into his mouth. Oh, it tasted so good. Rita laid her hand on his arm. "Hans, stop it," she said. "I'll get proper food for you." She knocked on the door and began talking to the kind old lady who opened it. Hans couldn't hear what they were saying. He couldn't stop tearing at the wall, and out of the corner of his eye, he saw Rita go inside the cottage with the old lady. He decided to wait for her outside. It was quite dark now, with moon still set, and he didn't want to go inside the cottage. He plucked at the whitish gray rock candy decorating the base of the wall. They would break his teeth, unlike Klaus's soft melting flesh. A heavenly smell of baking meat wafted outside. He raised his nose and breathed in deeply. It smelled like the meals his mother made so many years ago. Rita came to the cottage door. "Hans," she called sharply. "Come inside, brother. I've prepared a meal for us." Hans smiled hungrily and followed his lovely sister inside. And that, dear listeners, brings a close to these scary stories from Reddit. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you comfortably. If you're awake, I hope you've enjoyed this collection. Until next time, please take care of yourselves. I'll be reading to you soon. Have yourself a good morning, a good afternoon, or good evening. Peace, love, and light to you all.